Okay, I think my mic is hot now. Wait for some feedback here. I got my level turned up as high as it will go, but I always feel like I'm screaming, so hopefully I won't be disturbing anybody nearby me where I'm recording this at. Okay, let me get... That's about as good as I can do on the volume, guys. I'm sorry. That's as high as it's going to go. Alright, I guess get this started. Let me switch over here. Probably don't need this now, so I'll just exit out of that. Okay, so about a year ago, it was actually a year ago in February, I took on the task of learning p5.js. So a little bit of background before that, I had been watching some videos, tutorials, showing how processing was done and how p5.js was done. I had been watching those for maybe 6 or 7 months, and I was like, you know, I think I could probably do this. It's starting to click with me a little bit. So I looked into it. How can I do p5.js? Well, it's so easy to jump into it because most of what you need is right inside the browser, so you don't need to have any special software, compilers, and your friends, if they want to see what you've been able to create, they can do that easily enough. They don't need anything special. And you can even view these on your phone and share them with your friends through the internet. So I was like, that's pretty awesome. Hold on a second here. Let me adjust something in my output here. My video quality is garbage right now. Are you guys getting garbage video quality? Sorry if you are. I don't know if that will improve any. Wow, that is awful. You can't even see the type. Come on, YouTube. I'm pumping this out at a pretty good rate, so I don't know why it's so crappy right now. Might not be able to see anything. Okay, so I'll just play this and we'll see what happens. This is the last program that I made, and it's demonstrating vectored movement. Let me put it on a close screen. Can you see their antenna are moving now? So that wasn't there before, and I have a background. I have some stuff going on with the background, and it's leaving trails somehow, but they're not being cleared off. So that was kind of an innovative thing there. If you're interested in how I did that, I'm using 2 graphics pages. I'm using the main canvas for my objects that I have to refresh regularly because I don't want them to leave trails and be blurry. But I want the background to stay static, or at least have some control over the background, so if I want to just leave what's there, I can. If I want to erase it, I can. If I want to do that quickly or slowly, I can. And it's not going to affect my main canvas display. So you use the Create Graphics page and put all of your whatever stuff you need in there to separate it, and then you can work with those 2 things separately. So if you need to refresh your object cleanly, like your background for your canvas is whatever color and then 255, for your background you may not want 255. You may want to clear that more slowly, or have a lower number in the alpha for the background. Just do that for your separate canvas page, and it'll create this neat effect here. You can do lots of stuff that way, but this is one of the simplest and probably the most easy to see demonstrations of that. So I'm using these objects as like paintbrushes, and they're creating some procedural art. It's a very simple execution of procedural art, but the effects are really dramatic. Just a really cool program all the way around. So that's where I'm at today. So let's go way back, a whole year back, and I know that last year that we had seemed like 3,000 years, but let's just go back here. So I'm going to let you guys see my folder here with all of my files. It's a little scary for me, but I'm just going to open up a little bit. So I've got to scroll way down. You can see the dates on there going back April, March, back all the way to February. So I'm a little late on this video. But here it is. My very first lesson. Let's take a look at it. And you should be on the output of that. Let me know if you're on the output of that. Let me check my volumes, make sure everything's cool there too. Okay, everything looks good. So this was one of my very first programs, watching the tutorials from the coding train. Daniel Schiffman, I think he's a professor at NYU. Don't quote me on that. I think it's what I'm remembering correctly. Nonetheless, he is gracious enough to offer for free to anybody who's willing to learn p5.js instruction. So he's teaching step by step how to learn how to code the basic parts of how to get things to do stuff in coding using p5.js. So I started at the very front door of this process, and this is what I was able to make. An object that could bounce around the screen. It has a location, it has movements, it has a direction to move, it is bounded, and it's changing color. So a lot of the stuff that you need to make procedural art is right there in the first 2 or 3 lessons. And you can see this program isn't very complicated. Let me go over here to the wide window. If you can see the text, I'm sorry the feed is so crappy. I might redo this video just formally, but I'm going to put this one up for now because it seemed like it was easier to do it this way. So that blurry, texty looking stuff on the left, that's the program. It's not very long. There's things that I'm doing in the very beginning that I have since changed because you learn lessons. But I didn't know those lessons to begin with, so I just did things as best as I knew how that they would work. So I have tons of global variables, and a lot of those global variables could be local variables, and then I can turn a lot of this into a function or a class. But I'm not that far in the lessons yet, so I'm just learning basic, straight code. And it's not basic, it's p5.js, but what I'm doing is trying to apply 30 years ago of learning basic and then some programming languages in between. And then I learned a little bit about JavaScripting. So now I'm trying to put those two worlds together in p5.js. So this is how it started for me. And you can see the results just from a few lessons is pretty awesome. And you can get a great feeling of accomplishment just from doing this. So let's move ahead in time a little bit. There's probably going to be a lot of downtime in this because I got to load and do all that. So I'm going to select some of these. I was working with the examples like from the p5.js website and messing around with those some, just changing some variables, but I don't really count that as making a program myself unless I change it substantially, which I didn't here. But I think I did here. So I think in this example, and let's zoom in on it, I'm learning how to create oscillators, and I've done this in the past using some math that was like the longhand for sine and cosine, but I've since learned how to use cosine and sine, and you can use that to make oscillators. So that's what I was doing, getting these objects to move back and forth. Now instead of having one object and instantiating it and then changing its values so I have 4 objects, I'm actually physically making 4 objects, and they're doing everything that they need to do. So you can see the code, maybe you can't. You can see the code here is just a hot mess, quadrupling everything that I'm doing. So that's where object-oriented programming comes in, because you can assign a world to one of these things and then just adjust the variables of that world and then create duplicates that all have their own set of their own settings, but they contain the same properties. So getting my mind around that, even explaining it to you now, is a little bit difficult because it's I have to take it in as like a visual concept, and then I have to convert that visual concept into language and then explain that language to people. Conversely, I have to take language in and convert it into a graphic kind of visual concept. And then that takes some time for me. So I can't really be instructed or taught to in a mainstream way because my brain just does not work that way. So it's best left to me to try to learn things on my own. Otherwise, I'll be confused more than I'll confuse myself. So that's kind of the problem that I run into personally, and that has to do with autism. Other people may have problems because of whatever reason there is, but this is just my own personal experience of learning here. So getting my mind wrapped around object-oriented programming was a little challenging. It was challenging the first time I was trying to learn it when I took JavaScripting in college, probably 15 years, 16 years ago now. And I did okay, but it was a struggle trying to, because I'm clinging to what I know, which is basic programming, which is more procedural programming. And I was learning how to go and move into like modular programming in a procedural language, but I hadn't made that leap into an object-oriented language like JavaScripting. So that's what p5.js has done for me. It's moved me from that procedural basic, let's just run through the program kind of logic, to starting to think about things in modular ways and how the processes that we create are duplicated, so let's try to group those duplicates together somehow. That's what object-oriented programming is all about. So I'm trying to step up my game from basic programming, which is basically what these programs are, a procedural kind of thing, to an object-oriented thing. So that's where my progression is headed, because I know those tools are going to be really powerful when you create procedural art. Okay, what's next? I'm kind of move quickly through. I don't want to spend hours doing this, but you can kind of see where this is going. You can see the challenges like the coding train maze, which I made some really awesome procedural art. I have a video on my I think my classic arcade playlist has a video about that. Snowfall, making snowfall. I think what I did is I took the snowfall program. Let's go to the wide window. I changed it into bubbles. Do I remember this correctly? Yes. So just taking the lesson of snowfall and thinking about it in another way and be like, okay, this is almost bubbles, but they're going down. So let's kind of flip the script. So that's what I did here. And that's really easy to do because wherever you have negatives, you're going to put in positives and you're going to be working along the y-axis. So there's some known things about what you need to do, and those are pretty easy to identify in the code, even if you don't know what all is going on perfectly, which I didn't. When I created this, I was working in vectors. I think I was working in a vector. Yes, I was working in vectors with this example, but I didn't really understand vectors. I was just kind of, I know you have to do this, and I know that you do this to that, and this happens. But fundamentally, I wasn't really getting it. That would come later on. Nonetheless, I was still able to manipulate a lot of the variables to get it to do something different in a neat way. With that understanding, I'm wanting to grab a bunch of examples everywhere I can and do whatever I can to them, and in the process you kind of learn what's happening. You take it apart, put it back together, and if you can put it back together right, then you understand it. There's a chance serendipity could play a role in that, but by and large it's a matter of understanding. So let's skip ahead to something a little bit more interesting in terms of like procedural art. This was probably one of the top things here. And I'm going to, what's the best way to show this? I guess widescreen. This is an application that I made that allows anyone to create procedural art, and it's really clunky and it's not very user-friendly. Look at the control panel. It looks like a nuclear control station. There's nothing is telling you anything you need to know. And plus there's some quirkiness about it because I hadn't quite learned like how to control the mouse and the keyboard, how to control things when they're clicked, when they're not clicked, if you click on and then release the mouse. There's different ways of controlling it. I was still learning those, so I hadn't implemented it correctly. So I'm really not happy with that. So this is really hasn't gone any farther because I kind of ran into roadblocks. Now am I going to be able to set this back to where it goes now? If I don't set this back exactly when I go to the close screen, I'll show you here. That's pretty close to where it was. And the scene, I should see all the scene. Okay, I guess. But this just lets you use different types of brushes, and you can move them around the screen in different types of random ways. So I'm using different movers, I'm using different geometries that are being generated with different algorithms. And this code, can you guys see the code? You can't now. Widescreen. This code is a straight up hot mess. It has 10 years worth of global variables, functions all over the place, things duplicated like you wouldn't believe. It could be optimized and then re-optimized and optimized again and still not cover everything that's in here. So that's another reason why I want to redo this program, because it's really not done well. I had a good idea at the start, but I didn't have all the tools that I needed to implement it, so that's what happened there. Yes, earthworm. Looking at the examples, playscape. We can talk about it. This one will be okay. In the example page, there's Perlin noise. They do different noise examples, and one of them is a noise wave. And I first started working this group of these algorithms. I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know anything about begin shape, end shape, vertexes, how those worked. So I was kind of at a disadvantage to tear this apart. I felt like this code right here, I don't know if you guys can see that, can you? This code, I felt like it was essential to the process that was happening. Turns out it wasn't. And since I was reluctant to remove this, and for some reason I may have tried to remove it, it didn't work right, so I went backward and then ended up jumping over. It was just weird. I decided to leave it in there because I thought, oh, I must need this. And it turns out that I didn't. But because I believed I had to have this in here, what I wanted to do wasn't working correctly, so I just had to go a different route. It's like, well, let's just do this a different way. So I thought of, instead of having, what I was trying to generate was a landscape. I was able to do that later on, but at this point, I wasn't able to do that. The best that I could do is just draw the wave going down the screen and then use the background and fade that away. That's the best that I could do. Otherwise, with these lines on here, it was messing up the whole thing. It was putting a straight line through, and I just couldn't figure it out. It drove me crazy forever. Nonetheless, I made this program. You can adjust the speed, and I'm learning how to use sliders and save the picture to a file. So that was going pretty good for me there, and really excited. I was like, hey, I'm going to be able to make some serious art with this. So that's in and about, I think, when was that? That it didn't take me very long at all. I mean, it's just, we're talking 4 or 5 weeks into this part of it. Brain brush, no. I think that was the next attempt at making the procedural art application. Diffusion. See, I'm following the tutorials and duplicating those as best as I can. There is this thing called a follow 3, and I think it looks like a worm. It will follow your mouse, but you can randomize its location or make its location be random in some way, and that's what I did here. In this example, it uses a movement method involving linear interpolation. So I randomly select a point ever so often. I drop that point somewhere on the screen, and then the location of my object will go to that point, but it doesn't just straight go to it. He moves toward it with linear interpolation, which is just a really neat way of getting something to move fast and then slow down as it approaches the target. And then you just duplicate that process again and again. It makes this object look like it's kind of seeking around. And then if you don't erase it, it leaves this awesome pattern behind. So there's some procedural art using the follow 3. What I wanted to do with this was make lots of worms. I wasn't satisfied with just having one of these objects. I knew there was a way that I could put this into like a class or a function and make many of them on the screen at one time. So that's what I wanted to learn how to do at this point, but I still hadn't learned how to use arrays. I think here I might start getting into arrays here. If I've done anything with arrays, it's been with the help of like a tutorial. So the snowfall or the bubbles rising, that was an array, but I really didn't know what I was doing at that point. I was just duplicating what I'd been shown, and I knew that if you do this, this will happen. So let's stay in that lane. There's a few others down here in about the summertime. So now we're looking about 2 months out, 3 months out. And I've learned how to do something like this here. Get a drink of water. This is an alien display that I made. So now I'm able to load images into the program and use that. So I have this background template that has the basic graphic elements laid out already. And then I overlay on top of that whatever is going to be working in the program. So that I don't have to create a bunch of graphics that are just going to stay static. I can put that in an image and load that image instead, and it saves me a lot of time. And that's what I did here. So I'm learning how to use multiple objects now. This is where I'm getting into having an array. I'm able to move things around the screen using Perlin noise, and I'm using objects to generate some of the stuff that you see here. So the lines are being generated using a class of objects that generates a grid of lines. Its movement, I'm using a class object that generates the X and Y movement for a given object. And I'm using sine waves and mapping distances so that the scrolling, you see the ones, can you guys see my mouse? This stuff here, it stays in relation to one another. So they'll all meet back here at the same time, and they'll all end up here at the same time. And that's what happens when you use the map function. So I'm learning how to do that. If you'll notice, the font is unintelligible. That's an actual font that people offer. And one of these characters is like an A and one's a B. It's a simple exchange there. But it's a neat effect for an alien display. You could see this on a console somewhere in a movie probably. So that's the alien display. What about the Star Trek display? If you guys have followed my classic arcade graphics, I think I have a playlist. A lot of this stuff is covered in there because these are the things that I featured. I thought they were the coolest and I wanted to talk about them. So if you want to learn more about those, just go through the playlist. You can find those. I'm learning Space Invaders here. I have an object that makes flowers. This one I thought was really cool. I call it Alien Houseplant. I finally learned how to use the follow the worm that I said I wanted to make lots of them. Well, I finally learned how to do that. But I was kind of having problems with it because I wasn't associating, there was variables that was messed up, and it was causing a unique problem to happen. Once I got that solved, then I was able to do something like this here. Isn't that cool? And every so often it'll make this little flower, this rose, which is randomly generated object. I think that it would be like if you had a flat screen TV in a hallway, like as a painting, because people do that now, and then you had this generative art, procedural art on there. That would be a really awesome thing. I think that's the future right there. So So really happy with that program. And I think that came along in about the summer, beginning of summer. Let me get down about halfway through. Where are we looking at? May. Flying titles, title graphics. Let's see if this works. It may not. I'm getting more and more familiar with objects and moving objects around the screen. This one's a terrible example of that. I could do better than this. Is it? Maybe it's this. Yes. Okay, I'm going to open this up a little bit so you can see. So I have an object that will move anything around. You just give it its location, it'll move it around and keep track of that. So why not give a letter a movement and then give it a location to land on? So in one of the previous examples with the worm and the linear interpolation and giving it a target to go to, those targets are all random, and I got this idea, well, what if I set the target at a certain time, set the target to its location in a word? So that's what I did here. I wrote out the words, I figured out each object, if it's the first letter of that object, then its location is here. And then I just scaled that up, and at a certain time, the locations for all those objects is in where it should be in the word, and then they travel to it all at the same time and just kind of land in the word. I thought that was a really awesome display of technique and being able to use stuff and coming up with an idea and being able to execute it. That was one of the coolest things at this point, because I before this time I was running into the problem of I would reach a point, I'm like, I just don't have the tools to do this, or I don't have the techniques to know how to do this. It's not working right. So it kind of limits what I'm able to do. So I'll scale it back or go in a different direction that I know how to do everything. So it's never quite what I want it to be. This is one of the examples. It was pretty much what I wanted it to be, and I was really happy with that. There was some few other things that I was doing where I was taking a mover and I'd upload a picture like a thumbnail, and I'd move this object over it randomly or maybe in some kind of pattern, and I'd look at whatever color was there, and then depending on what the color was, I would move something else in a certain direction. So if it was red, maybe I'd go up, and if it was green, I would go down. See how that works? Using that procedure, I wanted to see what image could make what output. So that was something that I thought was a really cool idea, and I may work with it more, but it was too hard to achieve any really interesting results. I mean, you could do as well with just random values, unless you started with a thumbnail that had some kind of unique pattern in it, like a barcode. I'm not saying specifically a barcode, but it has some kind of feature in it that turns the movement into an actual structure. So I got to thinking, oh, okay, I'm turning one value into something, just converting or transforming it into something else. And it was starting to blow my mind a little bit. I'm like, I wonder what if I could be really deliberate about the thumbnail, what could I get some deliberate output? And then it turns into like coding and decoding, ciphering and deciphering, and so it was a rabbit hole I could probably spend a lifetime going down. So I was like, I'm going to spend too much time on this, so let's just move on to something else. And that's what I did. I think at the end I ended up creating something that would blend two images together, and that was kind of cool. When I created the alien control panel, I downloaded a font, an alien font, but I wondered if I could make an alien font. So I figured out a way to create some random geometries that would generate some kind of symbol. And it may not make sense, it's just random. And then I could have like 26 of those symbols. So that's what this thing is doing here. It's generating random symbols. I think it's moving them around in this grid just to be interesting. And this could be a part of a different display with the alien characters displayed there randomly. And you can keep track of the characters. If you make them as objects, you can keep track of them. So I know this random shape is associated with an A, and this random shape is associated with the B, so on and so forth. It can create something really interesting. If I can find it in this mess now. So once I get up here so far, I'm like, I'm so lost now. Alien display. I'm trying to remember what it's called. I think it's Alien Rain or something like that. Alien Letter Rain. There it is. So here's where it's tiled. And I'm shifting those tiles so many because it doesn't line up perfectly. It's just kind of a weird thing. That's just another character display here. So much stuff. I wish I could find it. Flying letters? No. I'm wasting all your time looking for these. Alien Letter Rain. Flying alien. Okay, this is it. Yes. So let me change a little bit of something so you can see what's happening. Isn't that cool? How cool is that? So I generate this random shape. I started out as like an alien letter or an alien symbol, and now it could be like a molecule or something like that, right? And then you keep track of it and push and pop, and you can rotate it, translate it, and make it do all kinds of crazy stuff, and then duplicate that 50, 100 times. And this is what you have. That's a pretty cool background, I think. And then adjust the way that the background clears it out, and you can get the trails and the ghosting and all that. But how cool is that? So enough with the alien ring. Star field. There's an example that the coding train does of a star field. Okay, I'm still on the close-up. Okay. This is an example of using the graphics page, the create graphics. I have a background that actually is receiving most of the action. It's receiving the stars. So that I could put a foreground image, that's this tree, and then grass. So I have, okay, I think the main canvas is printed in the background, and then the graphics page is printed on top of it. And that's the tree and the grass. And I think it's a PNG. So I can see through the rest of it. So it gives me a look at the actual canvas. And then on the canvas, I have stars that are shooting from the center and going to the edge of the screen. But I'm translating and rotating that page so that those objects look like they're spiraling in the sky. And then I'm printing stars every time every frame count I'm printing the background stars. And then every frame count I'm rotating and spinning a set of stars that are flying from the center. And then on top of that, it has a tree and the grass. So there's a lot going on here. And because it's a PNG and I cut out some of the color in order to see through it, you can see through the grass. Kind of a glitch in my overlay, in making my overlay, but still kind of cool. And that's an example of just using lots of different ideas to get around some of the constraints that you have. It's like, okay, I can't do it this way, but can I do it that way? And so when you start thinking about that, you're like, well, in order to do that, I need this tool. And then you start go on and start searching for it. It's like, can I do this? Is there a tool for this? It turns out most of the time there is, because someone's probably thought of that before you, and they came up with the solution. There are very few new ideas. There really are. Doing the flow field was pretty cool. I won't show you that. I will show you this though. This is what I was talking about earlier, where I'm going over a thumbnail, I'm looking at the color there, and I'm doing a movement associated with that color. So I took the Hilbert curve and created it in Adobe Illustrator. I haven't done that in code yet. I plan to do that. But for now, I just did it in Adobe Illustrator. It was easier. Made a thumbnail, uploaded that, and now I'm scanning that thumbnail, looking at that Hilbert curve, so there's some uniformity that occurs. There's a frequency of things that happens. And I wondered if I could capture that frequency in some kind of structure in this procedural art here. So this is going to play out over time, and I can change the positions and stuff like that, but it really doesn't create anything interesting, I think. Not compared to how, I think it's more interesting explaining the process than what it actually outputs. So that's a hard problem to sell. I need the output to be worthwhile, you know. So getting closer here to the end of what I have been able to make. One of the things that I'm really proud of that I was able to create, and I wanted to do this from the very first day that I started learning p5.js. Once I learned what you could do, I was like, oh, that's cool. That's basically like having a moving Adobe Illustrator. So instead of laying something down, it just stays there. Now I can move that stuff around. I just have to know the code for it. So imagine having Adobe Illustrator with things that you could move around and have code that would duplicate it and put them in there and then take them out as needed. I mean, it's just blew my mind. I was like, I'm doing this. So what was it? I think I did a video on this, and I show most of the stuff in detail. My Star Trek The Next Generation display. So proud of this thing. I really love it. Make sure you guys can see the output. Yeah, there we go. This thing is cool. The only thing it doesn't do is, what happened? Kind of messed it up a little bit. You can't click on stuff and things happen. That's the only stuff that it doesn't do yet, but it's animated. It's got a wave up here. It's got some things, looks like they're getting shot here, some meters going up and down. Got numbers flying all over the place. You got this grid, crosshairs moving back and forth. Power level. Some fancy techno jargon. It's got it all. So really happy with that. And that used just about everything I knew up until that point. I had to employ that in order to get that thing to work. And it took a little bit of time, but I got it going. So I'm getting up here into, now I'm starting to figure stuff out. And I'm able to accomplish deliberate goals. So one of those deliberate goals was making asteroids with the help of the tutorial on the coding train. Because can you believe the coding train? I mean, what an awesome resource that is. Thank God for Daniel Schiffman wanting to share this. I know it's exciting. I want to share it too. So he's definitely participating in a personal love there. But thank you for taking the time to do it. I know you have a busy life, and it does take a lot of time and resources for you to do that. So thank you personally, and for anybody else who watches him and gets something out of it, like Asteroids. Look at this. This is kind of a coder's dream come true. When I was in middle school playing Asteroids, like, man, that'd be cool to learn how to make that. I wonder if I could learn how to make that one day. Well, that day has come. This is Asteroids, thanks to Daniel Schiffman's help. Once he made it, and I'm like, oh, okay. I learned so much just in the process of learning how to make this game, because he works in vectors. And the game, Asteroids, used like a vector monitor that's vector graphics. It's all vector, vector, vector. It was like vector was the quantum of the 80s, right? So learning vectors was top of my list at this point. And also working with arrays, getting an array to grow and shrink, to add and subtract from an array, and instantiating objects and then renewing those objects. That was something that I wanted to learn. So that all came to it right here. I think I can play this game. Maybe. Yeah, I can. It doesn't have sound yet. It needs sound. Every game needs sound. But that's coming up here. So after Asteroids, I wanted to make it my own kind of theme thing. So I made the Star Trek Asteroids, and there's a video for that. So we're getting into almost a year's worth of programs here. And I'm making objects like paratroopers, scalable objects. These guys don't have parachutes yet. And then I'm getting up into things like procedural art using rotation and translation and multiple objects. In this example here, again, this could be one of those things that sets on a flat screen TV in a hallway that's intended to be like a painting, but now it's video because we can do that now. This would be one of those things you could put on that. So real quick, I got something else here, real sort of fast. Oh yes, springs. When I learned this, my mind exploded. It was like that experience almost a year ago when I was like, oh, I could do all this stuff now. These are springs, physics models, where you can get things to have shape, and that shape can have motion that's relative to itself, and you start getting into dimensional things. And oh, I'm so excited about springs. Thanks, Daniel Schiffman, for finally bringing that to the coding challenge, because that's what I've been waiting for. Learning more about that's going to be fun. Pendulum, strings. So I think that's pretty much everything. Have I showed you guys this graveyard? Is it? I can't remember where it was, what it was. Oh, here it is, yeah. Okay. It started out as fog, I think. Ooh. Creepy. You guys see back here? Look at that. That creep back there. So it's where I first got the idea to have a shooting star go across the screen. And that was like, oh, a shooting star object. I haven't made one of those yet. So then I made a shooting star, and that's like one of my latest videos. So you can check that out on the Classic Arcade Graphics playlist. I think that's pretty much it. Most of the progression from a year ago to now, learning p5.js. It's been so much fun learning about things like exploding text, creating a video game, Star Trek Warp Speed, made my own video game based on Asteroids, and check that out. That's in. And also, some exciting news for you guys. I'm finally getting my act together. I'm going to go back through the Classic Arcade videos and put links to my programs so you guys can look at those programs through the Chrome browser. And then if you click on the name, you should be able to go into the actual coding and see the code itself. So if you want that and play around with it, it'll be available to you guys. So there you go, my gift to you. And your gift to me has been sharing this with me and me allowing me to share this with you. So I appreciate that. If if you're visiting later, thank you. If you've watched during the stream, thank you for stopping by and checking that out. I guess that's it for this video. Is the text actually exploding? No, it isn't. I wanted to end on that, so I got to do this right. Go down here, find some exploding text somewhere. There we go. Let's end this right. Some exploding text. This is something I was really happy when I made too. I've got a missile that's flying towards some text. In this case, it's a clock. And then when it hits it, it just blows it up into a zillion pieces. Isn't that awesome? This is so satisfying for some reason. It must be the man in me. I don't know. Anyway, thank you for joining me on the day that you see here at the time that you see there. I appreciate it. As always, until next time, take care.